Well, I think in the context of NATO's deterrence and defense posture review, those are the sorts of questions that they have to ask. Who does NATO seek to deter? Do you need American nuclear weapons in Europe for deterrence to work? And I suspect at this point within NATO, you probably are going to have a hard time finding a consensus. I think there are some allies who think that you don't have to have nuclear weapons here, that the American nuclear deterrent based in the United States can provide it. But you have other allies who I think are attached to the current posture and feel, in part because they still have some doubts about Russia and Russian intentions, that the nuclear posture shouldn't change. So finding a solution and a consensus on this in the next 6 months, I think, is going to be a challenge for NATO. Well, the New START Treaty entered into force in February, and actually a lot's going on now. I mean, something like 1,500 notifications have been exchanged between Washington and Moscow on implementation of the treaty. And I believe that both the American and Russian sides have each conducted 12 of their 20 inspections that they're allowed during the first year of the treaty. So a lot of things are happening. And it, of course, now raises the question of what comes next. And there's thinking going on in Washington about how you address further reductions in strategic nuclear weapons, but also beginning to think about how you would address non-strategic nuclear weapons. My own thought, and I think some in Washington are thinking along these lines, is it may be time where you put all the nuclear weapons on the table together. Because really, when you look at a nuclear weapon, the difference between a strategic weapon and a tactical weapon, it's not related to the characteristics of the weapons itself, it's related to the characteristics of the delivery system. And so it may be time now to put everything on the table and have a negotiation that covers all these weapons. That may make the negotiations more complex, but it also may open up some opportunities for some trade-offs that would allow you to achieve some more significant reductions. Now, as for timing, I think it's pretty hard to see a formal negotiating start in the next year. And that's due primarily to the fact that there's a presidential transition that's going to happen in Russia. And I think the Russian bureaucracy is going to be a little bit more cautious until that transition is completed. And you have a presidential election going on in the United States. So while my understanding is that I think the United States is trying to pursue some consultations with the Russians on this, the Russians may want to wait until 2013 and understand who's going to be in the White House before they get into formal negotiations. So the question then for 2012 is, can there be consultations that lay a lot of the basis so that if in 2013 you're ready then to resume formal negotiations, you've set the stage as well as you can. Well, I think the ideal outcome is, of course, the treaty, because then you have not just the legal limits, but you also have a full set of verification and monitoring measures, which allow the sides to assure themselves that the treaty is being implemented as per its requirements. But while you're doing that, perhaps in parallel, there are other things that you could do. For example, confidence-building measures. The United States in April of last year announced how many nuclear weapons it had in 2009. It was 5,000 and some weapons. And the first time the U.S. government ever announced them. Greater transparency might be useful in the sense that if you knew the other side's numbers, you could begin thinking through, well, what sorts of limits might you propose in a real negotiation? And it would also give you a way, if the sides were doing unilateral steps, to say, well, is in fact the side, we have more information to check whether in fact those unilateral steps are being implemented. So that would be one thing, transparency. Another step, there might be unilateral steps, and here I'd go back to the 1991 example when President George H.W. Bush announced a series of unilateral reductions of American nuclear forces. A few days later, President Gorbachev on the Soviet side announced, and you had these initiatives, referred to as presidential nuclear initiatives, that wiped out thousands of nuclear weapons on both sides. So one question is, are there some unilateral steps that might be taken while you're doing this negotiation? So I think there's a fairly broad range of options out there, but ultimately I think in the end it would be good to get to a negotiation that produced a treaty outcome.